Britain is living life on the edge. On Thursday, the 23rd of June, a new train will arrive. It will transport the United Kingdom to a new destination, but no one knows where the train will stop. The populist Leave campaign has been accused of offering fantasy policies, a vision of Britain outside of Europe based on little more than wishful thinking. The Remain campaign is accused of running Project Fear, focusing on the plague of woes facing Britain outside the EU. Polls suggest voting will go right to the wire, but then they said that about the handsomely won Scottish independence vote and David Cameron's convincing 2015 general election win. In the end, it could all come down to motivating the youth vote.
It's quite important, I think, for a lot of university students because it will affect the Erasmus scheme and things like that, studying abroad and also international students coming in. And I think it's especially a debate for us because it's something for the future and it will be a major decision that will affect us for quite a while.
Brexit, do you think it's a good idea for Britain?
I think it would be an absolutely awful idea. I think it's been led by scaremongering and it doesn't show the nation in a very good light, I don't believe. You know, we're sort of warm, friendly sort of people. The Brexit's all sort of go away to people. We're sort of, you know, kind of feel that sometimes we're trying to stick two fingers up to everyone. I just think it'd be silly to leave, economically especially.
What happens to the UK's economy if it votes Leave? Team Brexit have declined the advice of mainstream economists, the Bank of England, the IMF, global investors, and told Britain to trust them. It'll be fine. They will make Britain great again. The trouble is, Britain in general is doing just fine economically. In broad terms, unemployment is trending at historic lows, the economy is growing, though slowly, the UK is gradually reducing sovereign debt, and it retains monetary independence with sterling.
All the experts, so denigrated by the Leave campaign, who apparently don't want to hear expert opinion, say that we will suffer a recession. We could open up a hole in the public finances of £40 billion, which is, you know, at least 5 times the amount of our net contribution to the European Union, and that we won't attract the foreign investors, the manufacturers, for instance, who set up in this country because we have this free access to the EU single market.
It's very difficult to tell the impact of the European Union, whether it is beneficial or not, but in my opinion, I think just as we're developing from the recession and finally getting a bit of recovery Europe-wide, I think it's the wrong time to have this debate, and I think it will probably have a significant impact on the exchange rate and all things like that.
We've got to sort of realise the position we are within the world. You know, we may have given the world the Industrial Revolution, but we're just a mid-sized European nation. They always said, oh, we're the 8th richest country. But that's still a long, long, long way behind the sort of top 2 or 3, you know, China, America, Germany.
Because that sort of ripples out there to everyone.
I think, personally, Britain should leave. I just don't think our small country can actually cope with the amount of migrants keep coming into the country. I live down in Gravesend, and there's a massive crisis down there with, you know, there's migrants everywhere, all standing about, not knowing what to do and, you know, waiting for something to happen.
For all the chaotic debate on the economy, immigration is the most emotive issue of the campaign. Brexiteers are unpersuaded of the need for migration to sustain the economy, and most take little or no cognizance of the 2 million Brits living and working across the EU. What will happen to them in the event of Brexit? How would the UK cope if they are suddenly compelled to move back home?
I'm worried that if we leave, then people who are already abroad will have to come home. And they don't want to come home. And we wouldn't want to come home. We're going to Austria to be chefs. We don't want to come home.
Obviously, EU migration, and in the context of all immigration, is a factor and has to be dealt with sensibly. But of course, we get a massive benefit from EU migration. It's a two-way street because there are up to 2 million Brits living in other EU countries who have no idea what's going to happen to them. But I do think that the government should have been, and in the future must be, more nimble about moving public services to the areas which are under most pressure from migration flows.
Most Brexiteers are prepared to consider migration, for example, if it is managed more sensitively, but in general they do not trust politicians. David Cameron is not trusted, Boris Johnson is seen as self-serving and in pursuit only of his own interest, the keys to number 10. Nigel Farage, however, is largely trusted by Brexiteers because he seems genuinely convinced of his own arguments.
How do you see a difference between Farage and Boris Johnson?
I just think Farage has got his heart in the right place, really. He's really concerned about the country and, you know. Yeah.
How do you see David Cameron?
I just don't trust the guy, really. I just don't like him.
I think neither of them are appealing to the modern Englishman, and I think it's a bit archaic the way they're going about it, but I think they can be quite charismatic. Boris is very charismatic, but people don't necessarily agree with him, that's the problem.
Do you think Boris is in it for Boris or in it for the country?
Boris is in it for Boris. There's no doubt about that. I like Boris as the Mayor of London, but Boris is in it to try and become Prime Minister.
Oh, it's most certainly it's about Boris Johnson getting into Downing Street, which is just behind us. For those who may not know, it most certainly is. Johnson's always had his eye on the main prize. I think he was actually disappointed when the Conservatives won the last election with that narrow 12-seat majority.
I think countries could keep their own identity and their own politics and do what they want for them. What they know is best for themselves. They shouldn't be able to listen to someone else tell them what to do.
We cannot vote out the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels who actually make all the laws. These are all people who have a vested interest in Britain staying within the European Union. The reason why Obama and the United States want Britain to stay is because of TTIP.
After the messy Scottish referendum polling disaster and the complete inaccuracy of the 2015 general election polls, most Brits don't trust the polls, but many believe the vote will be almost evenly split and they feel the campaigns are running neck and neck.
Do you think that the opinion polls are correct at the moment?
Yes, but I also think lots of people aren't voting.
Do you trust the polls?
Well, they're all over the place, and my working assumption is that it's about 50-50 at the moment. There's everything to play for, and I believe that the common centre of the British people will see us through to a Remain vote on June 23rd.
I think the tensions are high. I think, for what I've observed, is a kind of vote is bringing out a lot of feelings on both sides and strongly held opinions, and so I think you're seeing the same thing here as in the US.
How do you see the European referendum for Britain at the moment? Good idea?
If the British feel they're not getting a good deal, I think they should work for a better deal or leave.
Foreigners we spoke with took a broad view of the UK staying in the European Union, but essentially they saw general concerns about growing populism in politics.
You know, there's the same kind of populism we have in our election right now with a very popular candidate who maybe you wouldn't have thought was going to be popular a couple of years ago. So I think it's really interesting to see maybe the same thing with the EU, with leaving the EU, which may not have been popular like 5 or 6 years ago.
Does it concern you that people are prepared to set facts aside and just focus on emotional arguments?
Definitely. My whole background is public policy, so I'm very keen on people knowing the issues, knowing exactly what they're voting for, and not to get excited and listen to a few sound bites.
We've seen in a recent survey by polling organisation Ipsos Mori, fortunately, British people's perceptions of the EU are way out of line with the truth, and that allows a big gap for misinformation to be conveyed.
What Britain has shown is that Brexit is not a question of left and right. It's about national identity and a crisis of confidence in traditional ruling parties. At the heart of Brexit is fear. Fear of self, fear of foreigners, fear of markets, fear of things beyond their control. Political leadership has been replaced by emotional identification with a troubled generation. Demagogues such as Trump articulate the base fears of the electorate without giving tangible policies for resolving the problems. The electorate is responding to the politics of fear because they feel they have lost their voice, and Farage, Trump, Le Pen make their fears heard. But it is Spiegel in Spiegel, a dark echo chamber where the volume grows louder until the noise is so unbearable that the only answer is change, and the only way out is to close one's ears to reason and to release their inner voice. It is the politics of insanity. The United Kingdom may disintegrate. If Britain votes to leave, Scotland would have clear reasons to hold a new independence referendum, and an independent Scotland would be likely to seek membership of the EU. Northern Ireland could be plunged into a spiral of darkness with the collapse of key human rights legislation and the loss of EU development funding, the so-called peace money.
To the peace process and for the people of Ireland, it will be a disaster. 8 or 10% of the North's GDP comes from Europe. 3.5 billion is what we receive in economic finance as a contribution to our peace process. We've just emerged from conflict. We're still consolidating what we have in terms of the peace process, and to now have the prospects of an EU border right in the heart of Ireland. Without doubt, the days of England wagging her finger at what should happen in Ireland are over.
England would survive, but as a diminished presence on the global stage, Wales would probably consider independence more carefully. For a nation whose empire once spanned the globe, splendid isolation would look like the British took the wrong train, but there is another destination. On current trends, the UK would surpass Germany within 20 to 25 years to have Europe's largest population and largest GDP. If Britain votes to remain, then the land of hope and glory could yet lead a new Europe, a Europe united in diversity.